Wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove. So there are 3,000 species of snakes on every continent. You can't find any, of course, in the Antarctica. Snakes, people just love them. There are some bad snakes. There are some good snakes. There are only 600 venomous snakes, but the 20% has a way to make the 80% have a bad name. David's no snake. But metaphorically, if the words that Jesus spoke have any accuracy, he demonstrates the wisdom of a snake and the harmlessness of a dove. For those of you that have been here over the weeks, I've been teaching our congregation under the caption, Living Under God's Protection. Events and episodes from the life of David before he ascends to the throne as the king. There are many more episodes, but I'll end this series of messages today in chapter 26. Speaking of how David characteristically displays the wisdom and the harmlessness of a dove. Word is out that David is in the hill country, that he's perched somewhere at Hachilah. And now intel has been reported by the Ziphites to King Saul. Saul doesn't come empty-handed. Saul comes from Gibeah and finds out that at the hill of Hachilah, where the desert of wilderness rests, David has been hiding out there. So Saul goes down to the desert to find David, verse 2. But he doesn't go alone. He takes his 3,000 men with him. Saul sets up camp, and at the same time, in the hill country and in the desert, the intel that the Ziphites have given to Saul about the whereabouts of David is almost accurate, but off a degree. And those of you that know about degrees, you know off degree immediate looks different off degree in the distance. The further the distance, the more profound the degree. So they're in the vicinity, but they're looking in the wrong place. Simultaneously, David too has gotten some intel that Saul has arrived. Something mysterious happens in this story. God causes a heavy sleep to fall upon the camp of King Saul. David needs somebody that would go with him on a very dangerous scouting mission to discover the exact, not just location, but the arrangement of the camp of King Saul. And so he asks a couple of people, and then his cousin says, I'll go with you. So David and Abishai make that journey across the canyon into the encampment of King Saul to find out the arrangement, the security, the protection, and the military bodyguards that are around King Saul. Saul is in the middle, and he's surrounded by 3,000 men to protect him. David and Abishai, they walk right across 3,000 soldiers undetected. Nobody moves. No one is moved after they've crossed over. Nobody is stirred. Nobody's slumber is disturbed. Because you and I know what the people in the encampment do not know. and that is that they're under sovereign slumber. And so it's God himself that has caused this sleep to fall on the camp. You know it, I know it, because we have the book. They don't have it yet. They're living the story, we're reading it. And then a statement is made by Abisha, and that is, we got the king exactly where we want him. In fact, why don't we take the spear by his head and kill him and end this treacherous hunt between King Saul against your life? Let me leave one thing with you as we look at these verses that you can tuck away in your memory. And that is, when you're living as wise as a serpent, harmless as a dove, God can show you the exact location of your opponent. It doesn't sound like much initially, but if you know where your opposition is, you know how to strategize from there. If there's anybody that wants to end this campaign, a threat against his life, it's David. But those of you that remember these stories, you remember when you read chapter 26, you said, this sounds exactly like the story in 1 Samuel chapter 24. Not only does it sound alike, the movements are very much alike. The players are actually the same. The location is also almost exactly. It is deja vu all over again. And that's kind of disheartening, isn't it? Because we'd like to believe that if we overcome one atrocity of life, we wouldn't have to repeat it a second time. And I wish this morning that I was bold enough to make the claim that so many people claim and say, now that you've learned that lesson, now that you've crossed that hurdle, now that you have expanded that canyon, you'll never have to repeat it again. But I can't say that because you know life is cyclical. That just because you got past one problem doesn't mean that the same problem doesn't come a second time. Sometimes we say it this way, lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. Well, that's what you say. Ask Mel Roberts and he'll tell you that's different. This South Carolinian is 61 years old. And Mel has been struck by lightning not once, not twice, not 5 times, not 8 times, 12 times. In fact, meteorologists and scientists are now trying to determine what is it about Mel that attracts lightning. He's been struck, he survived. Neurologically, it has affected his ability to recall. This, he says, is the real heartbreak, not the burning sensation of the lightning, but forgetting the birth dates of his children and forgetting how he carried them around and what he did. And he broke down in his interview. He said, only if I could remember that. Lightning strikes, but sometimes lightning strikes in the same place more than one time. To know the exact location of the opponent helps us to understand how this occurs. David has already experienced this. This is not the only time. This exact thing has been encountered by David previously with the same people. And I wish I could say to you, now that you've crossed that difficulty, it'll never come back again. But I can't, because some of you have lived it, haven't you? You got past cancer, remission, and then it comes back. You're married, you're divorced, and you say, I'm gonna try it again, just to divorce a second time. You've done it in life, in a career. You've built a career and it's been successful, and then it plays out, and you start over and you say, this is it, and then it plays out. Lightning strikes in the same place. But just because lightning strikes in the same place doesn't mean that God has abandoned you in the place where you are. Bad theology. I cringe at it when I sit in churches, and I'm a preacher, and so I'm speaking of my own fraternity. I think I have insight on it more than you do. And I hear some of these bad promises are made that God would do. And I've been criticized by some of you who have sat in my seat that you wish that I was more spiritual and more insightful. So you pack up and you go where the preacher tells you what God is going to do in 3 days. The only thing that I know God can do in 3 days is get Jesus out of the grave. I think I've given my life over to the integrity of interpreting God's word. What I know, and that which I don't know, and it lives in mystery, I'm not ashamed to say I don't know how God's going to work. I just know God will be there. I know that's not enough for some of you. You want me to tell you that the child is going to turn out right, that the marriage is going to work, and that this and that. I don't know. I don't know how it's going to turn out. David didn't know how it was going to turn out. All he knew is this is deja vu. He knew the exact location of his adversary. But what he knew more than anything, and that is if God would be with him, he would be able to endure the difficulties that threats brought against him. Let me say something else now where we read. And now in verse 8, David now responds. I wanted to read that to you because I want you to hear what David is saying to Abishai. He's saying to him, look, God may have delivered our enemies into our hands. You could kill him, no doubt about it. Verse 9, but don't destroy him. Just get that one word. I'll stop there. But don't destroy him. Here's a second principle that you can live by in life, and that is sometimes it's best to live magnanimous. Magnanimous. That's a big, beautiful word. Sometimes it's good to live magnanimously. There's a word in the Bible that we use that speaks of magnanimous. It's called forbearance, carrying the weight. I like these words, forbearance. Make you sound like you in church. And we ought to want to feel like that we in church. Say it, forbearance. That's a beautiful word, forbearance. Have you used it lately? You ought to. Carrying the weight of something. Mercifully carrying the weight. Don't destroy him. Don't do that. Sometimes you display magnanimity. Just because you have the power to destroy don't mean that you destroy. David had the power to do it, but he didn't do it, and he gave the reasons why he didn't do it. He said, who am I to put my hand on the Lord's anointed? Now, Saul has been acting like anything but anointed, but David knew he was still anointed. That before he was anointed in his house of Jesse, God had already anointed Saul. And whatever Saul was doing, it was between God and Saul. And David said, I don't have a right to put an end to what God has anointed. Some of you grew up in church and you know the verse, touch not my anointed, do my prophet no harm. But not just for the prophet and the preacher, but for God's chosen, selected person, don't put your hand on them. If God has selected them, don't you put your hand on them. Many people have lived in misery because they put their hand upon the Lord's anointed. In fact, let God deal with God's anointed. He knows how to handle them better than you do, better than I do. Don't touch the anointed. Another word that we throw around loosely, casually. We went through a period of 20 years. Everything was anointed. It's such a beautiful word, I wouldn't even use it. It becomes so commercialized. We're the Lord's anointed. I'm under the anointment. David said, don't do that. Just because he's in our reach to be destroyed, don't destroy him. Exercise some benevolence. You remember Jesus made a comment about be happy that you're the meek of the earth, that the meek shall inherit the earth. Meek doesn't mean weak. Meek means power brought under control. And it takes a lot of power and control when you have the authority to destroy somebody, but you withdraw and you don't do it. You know where we get that from? I'm glad you asked. You get that from your Father, who is compassionate and loving and slow to anger and abounding in love. Just because you have the power to destroy it doesn't mean that you do it. Here's one. Add this to the list that you're writing down, and that is sometimes it's just good to let people go. You've seen the pictures of a human hand holding a timid, weak, trembling, fearful sparrow in its hand. The human hand could crush the life out of it, but you open your hand and just let it go. That's what benevolence is. That's what magnanimous is. That's what forbearance is. I know what you're saying. No, I'm not me. I keep a list with me of people I'm waiting to crush. Once I'm elevated to that position to hire and fire, I'm going to crush them. Once I start making a certain amount of revenue, I'm going to crush them. Once I'm in a position of power, I'm going to crush them. That's always the characteristic of a weak person. It takes power to be able to withdraw when you're able to crush somebody. David could have crushed Saul. He said, don't do that. In fact, just let him go. Forbearance, magnanimous. William Barclay is a New Testament scholar, and he helped people in the church who didn't have the affordability to do theological education, where he would take these high concepts and bring them down to a language where people could understand it. And he did a book on words. And one of the words he selected was forbearance. And he painted the picture of a vicious, ferocious dog. And while it was laying, pups came around tormenting him. And he says, forbearance is that animal knew that it could have just closed its jaws and broke the back of those puppies. But all it did was just shoo them away. Thank God. God has had the ability to crush us. And the Lord just said, now get out the way now. His benevolence. I'm done now. Let me wrap this up. And so David says, I'll tell you what we do. Let's get these images, the spear and the water jug, and let's go. So David and Abishai, they make their way back across the ravine, and they get back to the top of the mountain. And so here we are around verse number 13, 14. And David is calling out across the canyon, and you can hear his voice echo against the rocks. Abner wakes from this sleep that he doesn't know God put him in. And so David's a kind of bad actor now. For all of you around here, don't feel sorry for David. David's no pacifist. Ask Goliath, he'll tell you. But at the same time, he's a man that exercises civility and nonviolence. He understands the power that's behind being civil and decent. He knows something about nonviolence. And so now he calls across the canyon, and Abner is awakened, and Abner responds, "Who are you that calls to the king?" And David just has one thing he needs to know. Verse 15, he says, "Now, how are you?" And he gives a series of questions. But he said, "Aren't you on guard to protect the king?" That's all I need to know. So how did you allow me to infiltrate your camp and come in and take what belongs to your master? He said, "In fact, if you think that I am fabricating this, where is his spear and his water jug?" You see it? Wait, now I'm almost through with the sermon. See, if you miss this, you miss it. This is the whole story right here. Where is the spear and the water jug? Because the spear is the symbol of the king's authority. And who knew about the spear better than David? Because 3 times that spear had been coming toward him. He's had to duck it and dodge it, but then the water jug is the symbol of the sustaining resources necessary for the life of the king. So although David withdrew his hand from destroying the king, he touched not the Lord's anointed, it didn't mean that he could not take the property of the anointed. So though he did not physically kill the king, symbolically, he cut his life short. And that's why you don't have to hurt even your enemy. God will give you the tools to demonstrate that even your enemy had to bow at the footstool. Here it is. He said, "I got him in my hand. I could have taken his life if I wanted to, but I didn't have to. I'm going to leave his life into the hands of the Lord. But I got the symbols in my hand to remind you that God is in control." Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Now, I'm done. We're at verse 17 now, down to verse 20, and let me just end it by saying this, that God answers David in a dozen ways. In other words, God did what David asked God to do. God answered David in such a way that David would fill his Psalms with episodes from his very life. We don't know all of the episodes of David's life that instigated the writing of the Psalms, but we can imagine when we read these stories where some of his content come from. I mean, just think, if David is old now and he's retracing his steps, why wouldn't he say, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want"? I mean, the only reason why a king would say that is that you've been cut away from your kingdom and you can't access the refrigerator, that you can't access your closet, that you're on the run, you're living out in a wilderness place. And so a shepherd would provide for his sheep. And so David said, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." And then what about the nights where he was restless and weak and terrorized? No wonder he would say something like, "He's making me to lie down in green pastures. He restores my soul." And then when you start thinking about being in the desert country, in the wilderness, when you would look at being isolated and desiccated and separated, no wonder he would say, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley." I mean, you got enemies on your right side and on your left side. You got terror up in the mountain. No wonder he said down in the valley, "Yeah, though I walk through the valley and the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me. Wait, here it is. Thy rod. I don't need Saul's spear. I don't need Paul's jug. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. And then can you imagine getting hungry at night and wondering where food gonna come from? And David sitting down with his family and they're wondering, how we gonna eat? You got 3,000 soldiers camped around us. How we gonna eat? And David said, all I don't know, all I know is thou prepare a table before me in the presence. Hey, of my enemy. Look over your life and just think about the times where you didn't know how you were going to make it, and the Lord prepared a table. Folk talking about, but you ain't got no job, and you running up to that church giving your little pennies and nickels. Thou prepare. There you are, no gas money. Talking about you going to church. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of inflation, unemployment. Yeah, God is able. Oh, I know some of you are saying it don't take all of that. No, it probably don't for you, because you think that you are the reason your life is so good. But some of us know if it had not been for the Lord on our side, hey, where would we be? Let me sit down now. Let me sit down now. I didn't mean to go that far, but my soul got happy when I started thinking about how good God is. Yeah. Start thinking about it. Many of us experience seasons where our relationships with God turns into a routine. But you don't have to stay stuck there. Sometimes all you need is a new perspective. And I want to give you a fresh perspective on Christ's power in your life with my new series, Reconciliation. This 2-CD message series will help you experience the joy that God intends for you as His beloved child in a fresh and new way. Reconciliation is our thanks for your gift today. Your donation will help proclaim the good news of the Lord Jesus Christ around the world and help more people know the freedom and the joy that only Jesus gives. So receive your copy of Reconciliation when you give online at ralphdouglaswest.org. Be encouraged.